Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Can we just do an audio check? Could a member that's participating online let us know if they hear me clearly? Give us a thumbs up.
All clear here in Tracy.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. This is the East Bay Community Energy Board of Directors meeting for Wednesday, October 18th. Most of us are here in person. We do have members participating remotely. Their locations are listed on the agenda. Members of the public can participate via Zoom. That information is also on our agenda and can be found on our website. Can we please start with a roll call?
Here. Berkeley. Dublin. Emeryville. Fremont. Hayward.
Here.
Livermore. Here. Newark. Here. Oakland. Piedmont.
Here.
San Leandro.
Here.
Stockton. Tracy.
Here.
Union City. Community Advisory Committee. Present. Pleasanton. Alameda County.
Present.
We have a
Thank you. Can everyone please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Please stand if you're able to. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'm going to read a brief statement. Last month, we did indicate that we will no longer implement the practice of reading public comments into the record. They are available on the website for members of the public to review that information. We also wanted to give an additional announcement tonight. This is in regard to handling Zoom hate speech, which unfortunately has been rapid throughout the region. So our board of directors opposes racism, discrimination, and bigotry in all forms. While we strongly support freedom of speech, discriminatory and hateful speech are contrary to our core values of equity and inclusion. We cherish the rich diversity of the community we serve, and we are committed to fostering an inclusive environment where individuals can express their opinions in a respectful manner, free from discrimination or hatred. I am upset by the recent incidents on Zoom bombings by individuals making discriminatory and hateful statements about racial minorities, religious minorities, and other marginalized groups. While we want the public to feel comfortable expressing all points of views about our business, we will be strictly enforcing our requirement that all comments related to the agency's jurisdiction and the agenda item they are associated with, and we will not tolerate comments that are intended to disrupt the course of public business. So if this happens, I believe, Clerk, will you be asking us to take a 5-minute recess if we encounter this type of situation?
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you so much. We're now going to move on to public comments. This is an opportunity for the public to weigh in on items related to EBCE that are otherwise not on the agenda. And I want to note, I think at this time, I also want to accept public comments for closed session. Is that okay to include that right now in case members of the public want to weigh in on a closed session?
Madam Chair, I believe we're going to close session later, and I would suggest we just open it up briefly for a public comment right before we adjourn into closed session.
Okay, will do. Thank you. Clerk, do we have any members of the public that would like to speak under public comments?
Yes, we do. We have one member of the public with hand raised, Jessica Tovar, who recognized for 2 minutes.
This is Jessica Tovar with the East Bay Clean Power Alliance. And I wanted to speak to the local development business plan. The purpose of the local development business plan is to provide community benefits for the community of which EBCE serves. And the intent of that was to build energy assets in programs and projects around electrification, community resilience, energy efficiency, reducing our energy waste, for example, and building more distributed energy resources overall. And I wanted to just name that it's not only the building of the assets, but actually the clean energy jobs creation that comes with that and the reduction of pollution in our local communities. So I wanted to uplift that the local development business plan is at its 5-year mark. And it's time to evaluate the local development business plan project and see what kind of jobs have been created, what kind of assets have been built in the community, what's working, what isn't. It's time to provide those metrics so that we can effectively evaluate and update the local development business plan. And it's a great time to do that, considering that the agency is also changing their name. So that is it. Clean power to the people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Danny Hugh, recognized for 2 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Danny Nguyen, and I am working with Local Clean Energy Alliance as an extern during the summer. And I just wanted to say something I'd love to see more of in the future would be long-term sustainability, such as prioritizing renewable energy and clean energy sources that will continue to reduce environmental impact, as well as just plans for energy systems that can serve the community for decades to come. The importance of community engagement is something I also love to see more of as well when it comes to involving residents and businesses in energy planning decisions, just to get everyone's thoughts and concerns. And I also wanted to mention why microgrids and resilience hubs should be funded because of how important microgrids are for the reliability of local energy supply during grid outages and disasters. Communities do not want to see resilience hubs at police stations and fire stations. They would rather see investments in resilience hubs at places such as schools, libraries, and recreational centers. And it is more important that communities see resilience hubs here because they'll feel more safe and comfortable compared to it being at, for example, police stations or fire stations. And they are also just vital for remote and underserved areas so that they have reliable electricity to access to improve their living standards. Thank you.
Thank you. There is no further public comment.
Thank you, Clerk. I'm looking at the website, and unless I missed it, I don't see that we received any written public comment. Can you verify that?
No written public comment has been received for this meeting.
Okay, thank you so much. We're now going to move on to the consent agenda. This is items 4 through 9. Are there any members that would like to pull any items from consent? Motion to approve by Director Bowder, seconded by Wright. I will open up for public comment though before we vote. Do we have any public comments in regard to consent agenda items 4 through 9?
There are no hands raised for public comment.
Okay, we'll take a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Albany.
Yes.
Berkeley. Dublin. Emeryville. Fremont.
Yes.
Livermore. Newark.
Yes.
Oakland. Piedmont.
Aye.
San Leandro.
Aye.
Stockton. Tracy.
Yes.
Union City.
Yes.
Thank you. Pleasanton. Alameda County.
Aye.
Consent agenda is approved.
Thank you. We'll now move on to item number 10. This is our report from CEO Nick Chasser.
That working? Yes, it is. Okay, great. So on the subcommittee front, we did hold an executive committee meeting on October 4th, where a presentation was provided to update on the Healthy Communities Program, which is our direct installation of induction stoves and cooktops. Initiative that was funded in the budget, so we presented an initial proposal for the first phase of those deployments. Our next meeting is November 1st. That meeting will be held at the Ava Community Energy offices. And going forward, our executive committee meetings will be held at our offices, which is at 1999 Harrison Street on the 23rd floor. That will be noted on our webpage. Our Marketing, Regulatory, and Legislative Subcommittee also met in October, and the members received a update on legislative priorities and the brand rollout, which I'll talk about a little bit here. And that next meeting will be held, do not think it actually will be on December 25th, but that is when it's scheduled. So we might need to reschedule that one. On to the brand update. So this will be our last meeting where you see East Bay Community Energy logo and the name East Bay Community Energy on our agenda. And going forward, it will be Ava Community Energy, and that starting next week will propagate throughout our website, our materials. You will still be able to access all of this information if you go to evce.org, and our emails will still work. So there still will be all that functionality. But we are in the last sort of throes of EVCE, and we'll need to all remember to refer to ourselves as Ava Community Energy. I went to an event this week. It was the first time that I had Ava Community Energy, and people said, "Nick, have you changed jobs?" And I'm like, "No, like this is a great opportunity to talk about how we're expanding to new communities." So we're excited about that. So I've spoke about the timing next Tuesday. So that's when our website will be reskinned with Ava branding, and the redirect will be to avaenergy.org. Our social media handles will transfer to Powered with Ava. Email addresses, our call center scripts, and IVR will refer to Ava Community Energy. So that's really, kind of all the key stuff. But it won't be until the beginning of 2024 that we start doing more proactive customer outreach around Ava. So while Ava will be where people go if they're looking for information, we really think next year is when we're going to start doing more proactive marketing, brand marketing, where welcome to Ava or meet Ava, or however we end up presenting it. Okay, and that is what I have to report.
Thank you. Any questions or public comments on agenda item number 10?
I would just like to clarify that the next Marketing, Regulatory, and Legislative Subcommittee meeting will be held on December 15th, 2023 at 12 p.m.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Member Anderson?
My only question would be, is there going to be a fire sale on EVCE swag that we should all be aware of?
Gosh, you know what? We've been thinking about different strategies to upcycle. So, all of our water bottles, Howard doesn't have one. We have stickers instead of, right? So we just have to get a new sticker. We cover the East Bay Community Energy sticker with an Ava Community Energy sticker, and there you go. And I think for some of our other stuff, we're looking at buying patches, so you can patch over your EVCE. If you want, you can always go vintage and keep EVCE up.
Not to delay this meeting, Madam Chair, but so what are you going to do about your tattoo?
Member Gonzalez?
Was curious about, will there be billing insert outreach sort of so that everyone sees why the name has changed or anything like that?
Right. Yeah, so we do have an item where we'll be talking a little bit more, but yes, there will be in-bill information about the name. We're working with PG&E on the specific timing.
Thank you. Are there any questions from directors that are participating remotely? Has it been raised, clerk, from the directors?
No hands, there are no hands raised.
Okay,
from
we'll
directors.
open public comment.
We have 2 hands raised for public comment. Jim Letts, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. I just, well, I'm glad that the December 25th meeting is really actually December 15th. But I wanted to note that the executive meeting on the 1st is not even, it's not noted on the public meetings yet. And that seems like a bit of an oversight. The other thing, I'm a member of the Community Advisory Committee, but I'm speaking for myself. One of the things on the ad hoc committee about the name change was we felt, or it was important for myself to keep community energy in the name. And I'm noticing that the website, the new website, Ava, is Ava Energy without the community. The social media is powered with Ava without community in the name. And the email addresses also don't have community in the name. So I'm a bit disappointed by that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jessica Tovar, recognized for 2 minutes.
Hi, it's Jessica here. Actually, I wanted to, well, I want to support the whole community energy. We were the ones that said it really means a lot to us to keep that part of the name for the agency, since it is a community choice energy agency. The other part is I wanted to just remind folks, there's some people that speak very softly or not into their mic. I don't know if there is a mic, but sometimes the audio is really hard to hear. The first couple of things that Nick was talking about was very soft and sounded far away. It's hard to hear. So just wanted to remind folks of that. And then the last thing is, before they go out of style, I really want an East Bay ball cap. So if you have any more of those, say East Bay, I'll take one. Thanks.
Thank you. Any more public comments?
There's no further public comment.
Okay, and I'm looking online. I don't see that the website is up. Is that? Not sure what Mr. Letts was referring to. Is it live? The new web?
It will be posted shortly.
No,
the
no, no. I'm
notification for
talking
that.
about the AVA website. It's not live yet, correct? Okay, okay. So can you speak to the comment about whether or not we're going to keep community energy? Do we know if that's going to be part of the branding?
Ava Community Energy is our name. It's absolutely going to be included in our branding. Right now, our website is ebce.org. So there's no inclusion of community. So when we're thinking about a web address, there is a sort of a recognition that you're trying to sort of make it so that somebody can spell it easily. So Ava Community Energy starts to be quite a long, if you're on mobile or on your computer. So we went with sort of the shortened avaenergy.org and avacommunity.org. It's sort of, we felt like energy was sort of important to sort of a descriptor of what we do. So that's why it was avaenergy.org, not avacommunityenergy.org. And it's our website, our email is tied to the website, so that's why it's included in our email. But in our collateral and the way we show up, it will say Ava Community Energy. Yeah, where it says Ava Energy, not Ava Community Energy, it's for the sort of user experience of not having a long word there.
Okay, so our written material will have the community energy tied in. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Are there any other questions for the CEO report? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to item number 11. This is a report from our CAC Chair Representative, which I believe is our Vice Chair. Member Hernandez, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chair Marquez. Thank you to the board and our staff here for East Bay Community Energy for another day or so beyond we transition next. The chair report by Chair Eldridge, she is away. She asked me to come through and we worked through the summary of it. Through the committee there, we reviewed and we got information about the net billing tariff, presentation about successor to the net energy metering 2.0. And there, the CAC requests that the board hear this item with enough time to make a recommendation that allows staff to create an alternative to NBT if that is the board's direction. In the presentation, it speaks to coming back to the board no later than December 2024 with a proposal how East Bay Community Energy will implement a successor to NEM 2.0. So the CAC really would like to see that sooner because 2024, December next year might be too long. In the opinion of the CAC, it is too far out. So they asked for the board to give direction to hear that item sooner than that period. We also heard on community innovation grants, and there that was a great presentation by JP and team. Some of the feedback that came through was the desire to see smaller grants, and some of these notes are now in the annotated agenda that was sent out earlier. So you don't have to take any notes, but I'll take a couple minutes here. A desire to see smaller grants. Some were mentioning about 50,000 versus 100,000, but still multi-year. It'll be maybe an easier application for small, local, and emerging businesses and community-based organizations. Again, the recommendation will be a couple smaller 50,000 multi-year grants. Also, a few small one-time grants for pilot projects and proof of concepts. We would look to see a presentation of an issue and an RFP issue and how to address concerns or anything that might be a problem and opportunity to solve, instead of just providing prescriptive grant offerings. There are also the recommendation that we have the same selection process that was used last round, where you have a combination of board and CC members receive, review, and select the grantees. We really strongly support staff's idea of providing technical assistance to small, local, and emerging businesses and CBOs who want to apply for grants. Just really helping those emerging organizations apply and successfully get through the process to receive these monies, and then you shepherd them through to actually make the work happen for our community. We really strongly support the resilient hub concept. I heard the comment earlier about not being in certain places. I think that'll be something favorable. And then looking at also clean energy jobs, that's important. There wasn't as much enthusiasm in the energy education and awareness, and also community ownership of EV charging stations. How we would really look at that. Would that something to be charged? Would it be free? And there was a suggestion about innovation grants should be separate from marketing and advertising budgets. It wouldn't be necessarily about marketing EBCE, and that grant shouldn't be used for that. That's a separate budget if you're marketing electrification, rather invest in the community to do work there. That's it for now on the CAC chair report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the report out? Any questions from our members participating remotely? No. Okay. Any public comments on this item?
There's one hand raised for public comment.
Okay.
Jim Lutz, you recognized for 2 minutes.
How'd I do, Jim?
You missed the second page.
We still have more to add to it a little bit later, so there's more.
Oh, okay.
Those will come up on the specific items.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
I wasn't sure how to
Good
report out
catch.
too. I asked the question, how do you do it all at once? It might make you go to sleep, but I understand there'll be more later. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions for a representative from the CAC? Okay, seeing none, thank you for that update, and we wish Chair Eldred all the best and hope to see her soon. We're now going to move on to item number 12, emissions overview. This is what we've been waiting for so long. Izzy is going to present this topic, and thank you for your patience, and we're excited to hear the update.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. Okay, great. All right, good evening. My name is Izzy Carson. I'm on the Power Resources team at EBCE, and without further ado. This is a emissions overview. So this was originally put together in April. There were a number of, this was in response to a number of requests and questions for more information related to the emissions of Bright Choice specifically and on some of its history. So this may look familiar to some of you who've seen kind of the preview at that time. There's definitely some updates since then. We'll dive right in. All right, so again, this is specific to Bright Choice. It's kind of the running theme through all the slides. We will talk through EBC products and what contributes to emissions for those products, talk through some history, and then a couple of changes that took place in 2020 related to emissions reporting and procurement, and then finally where we are now, including a comparison slide against other CCAs. So let's jump right into the power content label. This is a requirement to disclose a mix of sources used to provide electricity. It is an annual requirement, and it resembles a nutrition label for electricity. And we see the 2022 power content label right there on the right. Our submission is reviewed and approved by the CEC, as is the underlying power source disclosure report data from which this data comes from. I do want to note that there's a significant reporting lag. So here we are in October of 23, and the 2022 power content label was only just finalized a few weeks ago in October here. So this shows us is what types of energy that we paid for through direct and indirect transactions. So an example of a direct transaction is, when we get electricity from a solar resource through a long-term PPA or through a short-term resource, that's a short-term transaction that's also from a specific resource. An example of indirect transaction is when we purchase electricity through the CAISO market. That shows up on our power content label as unspecified power, so you'll see it there under the Bright Choice column. For this particular year, it's 28.4%. And since we don't know which generator or generators the energy comes from for that unspecified power, it's assigned an emissions factor that's intended to be reflective of the average emissions on the grid. A couple of distinctions I just want to make here really quick. Again, power content label is an annual requirement, so it's different than RPS, which is a multi-year compliance requirement. And then also, RPS versus renewable energy, they're often used interchangeably, but they're not the same. One is a policy and a fixed target, and the other one is a type of fuel. So just to put that out there. These are EBCE's two current products, Renewable 100, which is 100% renewable energy from California solar, solar and wind power. Right there. It's a slightly higher rate than PG&E, and then of course our Bright Choice product, which is our basic plan, costs a little bit less than PG&E. What we are looking at on the right here is essentially a visual representation of the data that we just looked at on the power content label in the previous slide. So again, you'll see that 50% wind and solar for Renewable 100, and then for Bright Choice, we've got a little over 49% renewable energy, almost 22% large hydro on top of that. And then that gray kind of portion of the pie there you see is the unspecified power. Again, it's at 28.4% for this year. It used to be kind of a confusing concept for me, the unspecified power, and it helped me to kind of wrap my head around it, to think about it in terms of balancing. So essentially it is the difference between what we need to procure on behalf of our Bright Choice customers, or what we procured on behalf of our Bright Choice customers and what's actually needed to serve their load. So I don't know if that helps anyone else, but that helps me to think about it in terms of balancing. Go to the next slide. This is that same visual, but 2021, which was the most recently available in April when this was first put together, and then 2022, which of course is just finalized. And if we were to create these visuals over the next several years, corresponding to the power content labels for each of the years, we would see that, the unspecified portion of that pie getting smaller and smaller as it has in these 2 years, and you see the renewable portion and the hydro portion getting bigger and bigger. That's in line with our approved path to zero emissions. And what you'll see a little later is that we're actually well ahead of what was approved and contemplated in April of 22 when that was originally adopted. So here we have renewable energy credits, or RECs. These represent the clean energy attributes of renewable electricity. One REC is equivalent to 1 megawatt hour of renewable electricity generated. And there are limitations here to the amount that each group can count towards RPS requirements. These are classified into three distinct categories called portfolio content categories, or PCCs. PCC 1 is considered a bundled product. These are from renewable resources where the energy and the REC are delivered together and at the same time. So an example of this would be like our Altamont Wind facility right here in Alameda County. PCC 2 also comes from a renewable resource, but those are generated out of state where the electricity is used locally. The REC is then bundled with substitute energy and then delivered at the same time as the REC. And then a PCC 3, which is, actually, let me just go back. PCC 2, an example of that would be like a wind resource in Oregon, for example. So the electricity is used locally, the REC is then paired with substitute power and then delivered at the same time. And then a PCC 3, which is considered unbundled. The underlying REC does not have the energy attached to the product. A little bit of history here. Initially, the Bright Choice Plan was created. It was in 2018. It was to provide electricity to customers at a lower price than PG&E and as a comparable product. In October of that year, the board also approved use of the Climate Registry, or TCR, which is a carbon accounting methodology. Climate Registry is a nonprofit national emissions accounting methodology. Is widely used by load-serving entities, including California IOUs and California cities and CCAs, and it's actually still very widely used outside of California. And then some of the changes that took place in 2020. So in 2019, PG&E initiated a formal large hydro and nuclear allocation process that was determined by load share. Deliveries for those were to start in 2020. EBCE initiated several discussions at that time on whether we should or should not take the nuclear allocation. That started in November of 2019 at the executive committee meeting as an informational item. Was followed by extensive discussions on risks, benefits, and costs with both the board and the CEC at the December 2019 and January 2020 board meetings. And there was actually a memo that was put together following the CAC meeting and presented to the board in January of 2020. It was ultimately taken to the board as an action item in April of 2020. I do want to note that staff actually did not make a specific recommendation as to whether or not to accept nuclear at the time. There were two distinct options that were presented, laid out the costs and benefits of both accepting and not accepting, and ultimately the board elected to accept the large hydro allocation and reject the nuclear allocation. It really was a fundamental question that came down to a trade-off between having nuclear and lower greenhouse gas emissions or not having nuclear. There were a number of members of the public and community that were involved in those discussions as well. And one thing I want to note here as well, there was a comment at the CAC meeting about the accuracy of these dates, and I just wanted to note that all of the meetings that I referenced here, both the November executive committee meeting as well as both the December CAC and board meeting and January CAC board meeting and the April meeting, those are all posted publicly on the EBC website. Those are the correct dates, the memos and the respective presentations. So. Another change that took place in 2020, so this was with the introduction of that carbon-free allocation from PG&E, EBC's focus shifted to renewable energy, and the Bright Choice target was amended to reflect a clean energy procurement floor. This was based on PG&E's prior year renewable energy power content forecast and included a 5% buffer to account for any uncertainty. That percentage buffer was determined by looking at previous PG&E renewable energy power content And based on an analysis that was done, it was 5% buffer was included to account for variability in that. It came to light that there were forecasting challenges that existed under that approach due to lack of visibility into PG&E's annual renewable target, as well as changing RPS banking strategies on their side. This is kind of further challenged by the significant reporting lag that I mentioned earlier. So the values are not fully validated until the fall after the power is procured. So while that 5% buffer may have been sufficient to account for the difference in previous years, in 2021, that approach actually landed EBCE with a lower renewable content than PG&E. Another 2020 change that came under Assembly Bill 1110. So this Assembly Bill modified the power content reporting methodology and emissions accounting methodology. It was implemented in 2020. So again, EBCE was using the climate registry. It's again widely accepted national emissions counting methodology, and this Assembly Bill required replacing that, which was sort of a global methodology, to a California-specific methodology. A few slides back, we talked about PCC2s, and EBCE procures some of the renewables from PCC2s. Again, these are renewable products that are used and counted under the RPS program as renewables. They're by and large wind, solar, and hydro resources, but they're generated outside of California. So there is clean energy that is being generated, and there are emissions that are being reduced, but because those emissions are being reduced in another state, this Assembly Bill, under the new accounting that it requires that we use, adds an emissions factor for those PCC2 RECs that's equivalent to unspecified power. So it's a significant increase in the reported emissions. So where are we now? And I apologize, there's a lot of text on here, but it's intended to really just highlight the path to zero emissions that was approved in 2030, and then two targets that were increased both in June in 2022 and in June of 2023. So again, in April of last year, the path to reach zero emissions was approved. It included annual targets for renewable and large hydro. 2 months later, in June of 2022, those targets were increased by an additional 5%. The power content label is on a calendar year, and because we are on a fiscal year, the increase falls under 2 different years, just to clarify there. And then again, in June of this year, just a few months ago, those targets were again increased for 23 and 24 respectively by 5 and 10% respectively. And we'll see that, we'll go through it in the next slide a little bit more detail. This is kind of a continuation of the previous slide. A couple things I want to just clarify here. So the table that we're looking at here, 2018 through 2021, which is the grayed out portion of this table, are actuals. Everything from 2022 to 2030 are the values that were originally included and contemplated in the path to 2030 that was approved April of last year. 2022 specifically, I left the values that were approved to highlight how far over those targets that we've actually made progress towards. So the box on the top has our 2022 actuals. You'll see the renewable portion at 49.4 where we landed. Carbon-free, we landed at 71.4, and the unspecified at 28.4. And if you go down to the table, what was originally contemplated was 45%, so we landed quite a bit over that. 63% carbon-free, we landed at 71 again, and then that 37% unspecified power dropped down to 28.4. And if you're looking again at that box on top, our renewable targets for 2023 and 24, specifically if you're looking at carbon-free, that's 76% and 81%. If you look at where that is in the table, we're actually 2 years ahead of schedule. So significant progress to highlight has been made in accelerating those targets just in the last 18 months. On the bottom of that table, is our emissions factor for 2022. There was a comment at the previous board meeting that asked for a breakout of what our emissions would be if we were to be using the climate registry still, if it was an allowable methodology, and also what portion of the emissions could be attributed to those PCC2s. So I have that breakout there on the bottom. It's a little bit over half. That's the TCR emissions factor. Most of that's attributed to unspecified power. But just to share that as it was a request. The next slide. So again, this is overview is really focused on Bright Choice, but it's important to note that EBC's total emissions includes our renewable 100 product also. Again, this table is laid out very similarly, and I apologize, I probably should have, in retrospect, labeled the table a little bit to make it clear to anyone who's not in the room with us during the presentation. But again, it's laid out in the same way. 2018 through 2021 are actuals, and then 2022 through 2030 are what was originally contemplated in the April of 2022 path to 2030. So you'll see down at the bottom, I've done the same breakout. And you'll see that for 2022, our emissions landed this year, the weighted emissions are at close to 383, and what was contemplated last year was 450. So yes, significant drop there. And then again, we have the breakout for what the emissions would be if we were continuing to use the climate registry, and what portion of that weighted emissions is attributed to PCC2s. One other thing I just wanted to highlight here, because I think it's good news, is on the left there, the R100 megawatt hours. So this is just kind of showing the success of promoting and signing people up for Renewable 100. So the 2021, that just shows our load at just over 97,000, and a year later, close to 14-fold over. So huge success in increases to the Renewable 100 product. And then with that, we'll go on to the CCA comparison slide. So again, there's some questions that came up at the March board retreat that specifically asked how EBC compared against other CCAs on power content, emissions, and rates. And so this table puts all of those pieces together. So we're looking at is the 2022 power content label data, which was just finalized again in October, a few weeks ago. This is PG&E's most recent generation rates earlier this year. And these are the rates for each of these CCAs that are currently posted to their website. This table is filtered by RPS content, so you can see EBCE highlighted there in green. There are 5 CCAs with a higher renewable content than us shown on here, really 2 that have meaningfully higher renewable content. There were questions at the CAC meeting, and also it came through email asking why there are 5 CCAs that don't have nuclear content but have lower emissions than EBCE. And there really is not one answer that across the board can answer in that. There are several factors that contribute to that. So we'll go through some of those now, but fortunately there's not just a across the board answer. Each of these CCAs has a very unique service territory and load, demographics, including price sensitivity, location, all very unique to each of the CCAs up there. Also the amount of load, EBC has twice the load of some of those CCAs. Another important factor is how long that they've been in existence. So MCE, for example, it's the first CCA. They were formed in 2008, launched customers in 2010, many years ahead of us at 2018. So pricing was certainly lower at that time, and certainly less competition for those projects, given that they were the first CCA as well, could be a contributing factor. Certainly acceptance of or rejection of the nuclear allocation. We were just looking at the breakout for the climate registry and how that shows essentially what our unspecified power was. So if we had accepted a nuclear allocation, that 2022, the emissions column would be in the 200s off the bat, all else equal, not without anything else changing. So another point is EBCE. Well, all five of those CCAs have higher rates than EBCE, and I will also note that of all of the CCAs up there, EBC is the only one that's at lowered rates this year. So rates are also a factor. Higher rates means you can purchase more expensive or more renewables. Again, lends to demographics, but also a factor.
Sorry. One additional point I'll note is when we think about comparison, our 2022 power content followed the schedule that the board adopted. So we took, board took action to say, this is what we want you to procure. It's focused on a certain amount of clean energy, a certain amount of hydro, and there was not a specific direction to say, we're going to optimize for pounds per megawatt hour. And as was discussed, because of this PCC2 dynamic and its meaningful effect on our emissions, we focused on the adopted target, which was a clean energy, not a pounds per megawatt hour. So that meant taking some PCC2s, recognizing that in California they carry some emissions, but if you use a different methodology, they don't. And if it is the sort of direction of the board going forward to shift that strategy, it is absolutely in the purview to shift away from clean energy percentage to pounds per megawatt hour. It will change our procurement strategy. We might say, we're no longer going to buy PCC2s. We're going to buy more large hydro. So what you could see is a lower RPS percentage and a higher large hydro percentage, potentially. It's all about availability and cost. So I just think that that's a really important point is we don't procure on the basis of comparing ourselves to the CCA. We procure based on a schedule that the board has set forth for us, a schedule that we have, on an annual basis actually added to. So we had a base schedule, and every budget year, the last 2 budget years, we've ramped up the amount of clean energy procurement that relative to that schedule. So.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier too, on track to be 2 years ahead of our carbon-free target based on what was initially contemplated. So, yeah, with that, thank you. That's my last slide.
Thank you, Izzy, for the presentation. I'll first so this is just an informational item.
Yes.
So if there's any questions, comments, input, questions for clarification, Member Bowders, then Member Roche.
Thank you for the presentation. Can you pull the slide up that had where we are now? It was the schedule slide. The only question I had was, and you kind of just spoke to it, Nick, but the schedule, I heard you say, Izzy, that we're trying to be 2 years ahead of the target. I just wonder if we've ever considered, since there's so many years on the schedule, thank you, like have we ever just considered reevaluating the targets and like amending the schedule in light of what we've been doing? I'm sure it feels good to like say we're way ahead, but I just wonder if we should be responsive to the good work you've done and actually adjust the schedule.
Yeah. I mean, I really think that absolutely. I think we would take, we want direction from the board to bring back an evaluation of an updated schedule, and we're absolutely happy to do that. That is within, within your purview to direct, and certainly within our capabilities to sort of do an assessment and come back and sort of share, what it would mean, what the options could look like.
Okay, that's my only comment. I guess, yeah, that might be something worth doing. Just, I think for marketing, as we expand to the Central Valley and we grow the customer base, I think it might be worthwhile showing more ambitious targets and our responsiveness to the productivity that we've had. I think that might communicate that we're not kind of like we set something 5 years ago that's like a 10 to 12 year plan and we're just kind of working through it. I think it's really valuable to reevaluate our goals and increase them if that's something that we could message positively, I would support that.
Thank you, Director Bowders. Director Broche?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I had some of the comments about expanding because, and I know I've talked about this before and I'm learning as I go. So please, everyone, give me some patience when I have my questions about this. But, you know, I have people in Hayward are asking me about the Bright Choice content and that if we're going to continue expand, what does that do to our continued targets? The more customers we bring on, I mean, how are we going to be able to procure the amount to get those of us that are already in Bright Choice sort of to that original goal, which is cleaner and cheaper? And I know, and I'm talking about the emissions, not necessarily the renewables.
So, you know, that is a consideration that I think we have to account for as we can, you know, evaluate future expansion. So, you know, when you know you know, from a megawatt hours and an accounts, really it was the expansion to Stockton that is the significant one from a load perspective. The addition of Lathrop, the potential addition of unincorporated San Joaquin County. These are not significant numbers of accounts or megawatt hours. So those do not really have a meaningful impact on our ability to hit these targets because it's just not that much incremental energy that we have to buy. But, you know, if you were to contemplate a very large incremental expansion, or we were to see the proliferation of lots of data centers and lots of load growth, those are things that we need to be, you know, kind of thinking about. And we have an item just coming up about entering into a contract with a large renewable project. So, you know, we do need to be cognizant of that. I think one thing we do we're working on, and I think is one of the challenges, is when we send our power content label out, we're not able to tailor it to the specific city. So for instance, Hayward, that 90+% of customers are on renewable and 100.
Right.
And so when you get a power content label, you're getting a power content label that says Bright Choice. And so you might say, well, how many people are aware of the product that they're on? So one of the things we're doing to work with PG&E is to create tailored cities by city power content labels, so that if you are a resident of Hayward or Emeryville or Piedmont, 3 cities that are on renewable and 100, the consumer will get a power content label that will show the primary rate that people are on in your city. And I think that, you know, is helpful because people might say, hey, I thought we were all on zero carbon power here. Why does it say something else? And that's just an administrative task that we have to push through the California Public Utilities Commission.
Okay, because as far as you're concerned, the 2030 goal will get us to that goal with our current customer base and our projection into Stockton and Lathrop.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is that is what we're working towards. Yep.
And then, you know, just to my other question previously about Lathrop, which is, you know, we say here, Bright Choice Plan was created to provide electricity to customers at a lower price. And I just want to make sure when we go out talking to everyone else, you know, the original, my staff talking, you know, tell me, you know, the original JPA, which was to lower greenhouse gases. And, you know, in Hayward, we have a pretty aggressive goal on that front. And that we're sort of we've dropped something now on the description of Bright Choice. And I think we need to be clear about that. And I, you know, I think what you said is we're switching to renewable as the focus on that and not necessarily the greenhouse gas emissions. And so, you know, I just want us to be clear about that and honest about it as we go forward, looking at other customers.
Yeah. And I think one thing that it will be very significant, and we expect it to sort of come into play starting next year, is some of that is the frame of reference, right? Us relative to PG&E. Starting next year, PG&E's emissions accounting is going to be significantly changed, and we expect their emissions to grow significantly because one, there's an active proceeding or regulatory case to take all of the nuclear out of PG&E's power content, so that 50% would go from 50% nuclear or carbon free to 50% natural gas or unspecified. So you can imagine that's going to significantly increase their emissions. Plus, PG&E has more energy than it has customers. And so what they do in their power content is they just get to report the clean, and then all the dirty stuff just gets kind of swept beyond that. We're moving towards a dynamic where they're going to have to believe it's an average. They're going to have to show the emission. That's right. So they're going to have to show the emissions of their entire portfolio. So even if they had nuclear, their portfolio is just by virtue of that change is going to get. So from a frame of reference perspective, we believe there's a very good chance that in 2024, even if we're on this sort of emissions factor schedule, we will have lower pounds per megawatt hour for Bright Choice compared to PG&E, which is, when you think about the context of our JPA, that's the promise. It was always relative to PG&E.
Yeah, it was, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more comments, questions, feedback? Go ahead, Member Tidman.
Thank you for the presentation and all the work. I just want to note one thing on the CCA comparison chart of, I think I mentioned this in an executive committee meeting a while back, of you mentioned that some of these are much smaller or larger compared to us. So I think it would be helpful in the future when we see this chart to have size by load and number of accounts if we can, to help us understand that, because every time we have that caveat, and I think it's really important to understanding why is it easier for some other people to get where they are if they have a lot fewer customers and a lot less megawatt hours that they're actually providing. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. Member Gonzalez?
So we're over here trying to just wrap our heads around Renewable 100. Before joining this board, I was under the impression that that was 100% renewably sourced energy. And as I look at, I'm sorry, so I was under the impression that it was 100% renewably sourced energy. And so I guess the first question is that what Renewable 100 is? And the second question is, does this chart say that we're not achieving that goal? This chart being the one labeled total emissions inclusive of Renewable 100.
It is 100% renewably
100%
sourced.
renewable, okay.
And it's 100% PCC1 source, which means that it's not just 100% renewable, but these are renewables that convey the full carbon-free content. What this table is
system-wide.
We have roughly 7 million megawatt hours of load. In 2021, we had 7 million megawatt hours of customer load, 7 million megawatt hours. Of those, only 97%, 97,000 megawatt hours, the Renewable 100 only provided a very small contribution to our overall load. Starting in 2022, suddenly Renewable 100 is a 20%, so it's 14, 7, whatever. 25% of our load is roughly on Renewable 100 now.
Yeah, I think it's 20, yeah, actually.
So the point being,
22%.
you have 70% of our customers are on Bright Choice. Bright Choice customers, of that, 50% call it as renewable, a portion is large hydro, and a portion is system. And then there's 30% of our customers who are just on Renewable 100. So when you add all those megawatt hours up, that is what gets you to our total emissions inclusive of Renewable 100.
So if we looked at the chart that we're talking about, and it was literally Renewable 100 product, this chart would say 100%, 100%, 100%, 100%, okay.
That's right.
So I think that it would be useful to just present the data, just because then it's an affirmative statement. This is what it is, we're representing it to the board, et cetera. And then to have the other one to say, and the remainder is whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
The second question focuses on PCCs, or the RECs, and then PCC 1, 2, and 3. I really don't understand how the RECs work. And so I'm hoping to get just at least 1 minute of clarification, because when I hear that we've got renewable power, let's just say wind in Oregon, and we've bought it, but we don't get credit for it. I'm trying to understand how that ties into RECs, and I could be missing something somewhere.
So
that would be useful.
We do get credit for it. So Category 1 or PCC 1 REC, it is where the electron, it's a wind farm is in California or it's outside of California, but it is where that physical electron travels over a transmission line and it sinks in California.
So it would be like a bilateral contract with.
We have,
that
there's a
wind farm.
physical, like it physically sinks into into California Independent System Operator, whether it's because it's here or it's out of state, and there's a path on a transmission line that you buy. A PCC2 is a wind farm or a solar farm in Oregon that is generating, and we are buying it before it generates, and that energy is sinking in Oregon or in Washington, and we are buying the right to the carbon reduction, the right to the renewable. So no one else can claim that they have the right to that renewable energy but us. So from a renewable portfolio standard, which is the primary regulatory framework for driving more renewable energy development, you are allowed to count PCC1s, and PC2s, and even PCC3s in different ratios towards your compliance obligation. With AB 1110 in 2020, the state of California said is, yes, this counts as renewable, but unless you are buying carbon-free power that is importing to the state of California coincident with when that wind farm is generating the electron, you cannot count the carbon-free attribute. So we have a state regulatory program, the RPS, and then we have a local regulatory carbon accounting. The state RPS says, yes, PCC2 counts as a renewable energy resource, counts as clean energy. Our local regulatory framework that is governed by the AB 1110 carbon accounting says, no, you cannot. So there's a bit of actually a conflict between the two.
So just to clarify, make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. We could have bought the renewable energy credit from the Oregon wind farm. Just for the sake of argument, we consume that power, we serve load at, let's do a solar farm. Solar farm with no batteries. So we buy the REC, we serve load at night when clearly no solar power is being generated. So we would not get credit under AB 1110 for carbon-free, but it is renewable power that we've contracted for. And so we would describe it as renewable, but in the state accounting system, we wouldn't get credit for carbon-free.
Yes, more or less.
Approximately right.
That's approximately right.
Within 95%?
More or less, yes.
Okay. I'm just trying to
I think
get
that's for the fundamental point is that you count it as renewable. So for our renewable portfolio standard, we say yes. For our carbon accounting, now what we could have done is say we're going to buy 2 megawatt hours. We're going to buy a megawatt hour of solar and a megawatt hour of large hydro. And we are importing that large hydro into California, because if we were importing that PCC2 into California, it would be a PCC1. It is.
Say that again?
If you can import it into California, the power physically, it is no longer a PCC2, it is a PCC1, because I am physically bringing the power in. The point of the PCC2 is the transmission system, which is highly connected, there's lots of constraints. So there are wind farms that are physically unable to deliver power to California. They are still doing good things, and that is why the state treats them as eligible renewable generators.
That is very useful, so I appreciate that.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments from directors that are participating remotely? Member Titleman, go ahead.
Thank you. Just some of that conversation sparked one or two things, but first, if my numbers are right, our Brilliant 100 in renewable is about 22%, which, as I noted last time, is a huge increase from when it was 16%, and most of our new megawatt hours are coming there, and instead of from our slightly less clean energy package. But I wanted to ask, Nick, you mentioned that PG&E has more power than it has customers, and it'll have to count that at some point. Is all the rest of that power and the less clean bits, is that's what's being used to calculate some of that unspecified? Are they like pushing that basically onto everyone else to count into their
Yeah, essentially, yes.
dirtiness?
Yeah, it is going into the unspecified pool, and then, it's being counted as part of the unspecified. Yeah.
Great. That's what I thought. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Izzy, I want to commend you. You did an excellent job in tracking all the questions that have come up and being responsive. So I truly appreciate that. And you heard a whole another list of questions tonight in comments. So my question is whether we can, if the board of directors are interested in reevaluating our goals based off this presentation, is that something that people would like to revisit before we consider further expansion? Or is everyone just comfortable with accepting this informational item? Just want to make sure we're properly tracking next steps on how folks would like to proceed with this. This isn't an action item. Go ahead, Member Roche.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to, since I'm new, look at our procurement rate. I think Director Bowers mentioned it too, and just sort of seeing how we can get quickly, acquire more. So yes, I would be interested in that if anyone else is.
Okay, I'm definitely open to that. And what would be a realistic time for staff? Because I know there's a lot on our plate. So is this something that we would tackle in the beginning of the year, or when would be an ideal timeline?
I would just say that I think to do a very substantive analysis there would probably be associated with our integrated resource planning, which is going to kick off here and really take virtually a year or so to do. But I think there's definitely earlier phasing of information that could bring forth on different scenarios of what that would look like, so that then we are informing sort of deeper analysis that we're bringing forward.
So I think, but also in response to Member Bowder's sort of request, typically we look at in the context of our budget is when we've made these adjustments. And so perhaps what we should think about doing is in this next budget cycle, instead of doing a one-time, typically we've done a one-time or 1 or 2 years forward, perhaps in the context of our budget, we do a 6-year forward, essentially to 2030 look to say, hey, we're in 2024, we're not that far anymore. Here's where we are. We've done a lot of procurement. Do we want, should we take the levels that we are and just sort of level ourselves up to get there faster? Because I think that's probably, the budget is where we're looking at these. These are financial questions at the end of the day anyway. So that would be my general sort of comment, if that is amenable to the board.
That makes sense. And I'm very interested in, you had mentioned connecting with PG&E to see if we could do a tailored content label per city. I think that would be helpful as well. What I'm not understanding is it seems that a lot of the contracts, our procurement process is for renewable outside of California. So could that be part of the discussion? And why aren't we able to get projects locally? Can that be part of the analysis?
Absolutely. We will look at, kind of generation availability in state versus out of state. I'll say we still have the majority of our generation is in state, and we do have a out of state project on the agenda this evening. I believe, we only have one operating out of state project. The rest are in state. And so the majority, I think the bigger question is local. We don't have a lot of local, and that's a big, so yes, we will absolutely look at that as part of this and provide sort of an overview of the kinds of bids that we've gotten. We can only buy what people offer, and so we can provide an assessment of the kinds of offers we have for out of state, in state, and local, and just to give you a sense of what the supply looks like.
Yeah, I think that analysis would be helpful. And then just to piggyback on a comment made by a member of the public earlier, when do we anticipate having the metrics for the local development business plan? Would that tie into this conversation? Because it seems like a lot of this information is aligned with everything we just covered.
We have metrics that in the local development business plan, and so we I think are have on our to-do list this year to do to look at what we've done and apply the metrics and sort of to come back with an analysis of this is what greenhouse gas emissions, dollars, economic impacts, jobs created. That is absolutely sort of in our work plan.
Okay, and do we think all of this analysis will be done before we start considering additional expansion?
Yeah, yes. The only additional expansion that could foreseeably come before this analysis would be the completion of the expansion in San Joaquin County, and which we would be talking about unincorporated San Joaquin County. So I don't have the full number, but you're dealing with small communities like Mountain House, not larger communities like even a Manteca that would not be in scope. So it really is just, and so no further expansion is I think would be on the table in any way,
Okay,
shape, or form.
I appreciate that. 'Cause we are at our 5-year mark, and I think it is important to kind of reassess. So thank you. Member Director Hernandez.
Is this the appropriate time for the CAC comments, or do we wait?
Let me just see if there's any more members participating remotely that would like to weigh in. Has anyone raised their hand?
There are no hands raised.
And we will
from our
take
remote
public
participants.
comment on this shortly. So go ahead, Member Hernandez.
Thank you very much. Just comments from the presentation. Great job overall on increasing electricity rates more than other CCAs. Good trajectory to achieve 75% renewables and 100 carbon-free by 2030 without nuclear. Our CO2 emissions per megawatt hour is falling behind other similarly sized CCAs who also do not have nuclear, also offer cost savings. Pleased to see the nuclear allocation is not a significant factor as previously projected. More comments would be, we could be cleaner, would like lower CO2e megawatt hour rates, would prefer to see more local renewables to the comments here. The new accounting method measures the emissions in the air our constituents breathe. It is important to reduce environmental pollutants here. Furthermore, the CAC expressed concerns regarding staff portrayal of the trade-off between nuclear and greenhouse gas emissions. In 2020, the board voted to take the nuclear allocation and sell it, but were unable to do so due to lack of demand. So I think a lot of the comments here was thankful, grateful that we're tracking better some other, and hopefully we can do more, and maybe the comments here will bolster that, moving the goals up. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now open public comment on this item. Do you have any members of the public that would like to weigh in?
Yes, we have 2 hands raised. Jessica Tovar and Jim Lutz. Jessica Tovar, you'll be recognized for 2 minutes.
Jessica Tovar, East Bay Clean Power Alliance. I wanted to just name that when you only focus on reduction of greenhouse gases, by moving numbers around, it doesn't actually reduce local pollution, neither does it create local jobs. So, market schemes aside, I'd like for us to focus on really the investment of the production of local clean energy. And really a lot of the marketing for Renewable 100 promises that that money would be invested in creating more local sources of clean energy. The other thing I want to name that came up a lot during the Community Advisory Committee, not so much here today, but there was a lot of blaming not taking the nuclear allocation as a reason for having high dirty content in EBCE. And I want to just really name that these kinds of tactics are really corporate, and no public agency should be playing that game. The issue with the Diablo Canyon, yes, was a very contentious issue. There was back on Earth Day 2020, 64 out of 65 community members spoke out against it. There were efforts by EBCE to go city by city to try to, push the nuclear on each city. And then in December of 2020, took the nuclear anyway, despite opposition, and said, well, we're not going to use it, but we're going to sell it on the energy market after many times we had said there's no demand for it in the state of California. Another community choice was explicitly saying that there was precedent to prove that, and we were ignored. So I want to just uplift some of that history, and also just say, I really hope that we don't hear that narrative of throwing community choice, actual community choice, under the bus in saying that the reason why our content is dirty is because we didn't take nuclear back in 2020. clean power to the people.
Jim Lutz, you recognized for 2 minutes.
Yeah, this is sort of a philosophical question. Um, We've got a lot of long-term contracts for renewable, and that's great. But is there any risk that, 5, 10, 15 years down the line, we'll be paying more for clean electricity that we could buy cheaper at that time? I'm thinking of the experience that PG&E had with buying early renewable contracts that turned out later to be above market rate, and that's why we have the PCIA on. So I don't expect that change to happen in the next few years. I've been hearing that renewable prices are really high currently, but I'm just thinking long term, is there any risk of that? And I don't expect an answer, just want people to be thinking about it. That's all.
Well, I'll say that there absolutely is a risk of that. And one of the reasons we buy PCC2s is it's one of the only forms of renewable energy that you can acquire for short terms. It is harder to get your hands on PCC1s. You either have to buy them from the utility that has acquired these resources, or you have to buy them from new resources where you have to do 10, 15-year contracts. PCC2s tends to be the swing resource that you can buy 1, 2, 3 years ahead. And so that is actually one of the primary reasons we have it in our portfolio.
Thank you. Is there any further comments on this item? Okay, see none, we're going to move on to item number 13. This is an action item. There's been a request. Go ahead, Director Gonzalez.
I was going to request that we waive any presentation on this and just, I would move the item.
Is there any objections? Any member participating remotely? Okay, before we vote on it, is there public comment on this item? This is item number 13, Joint Powers Authority Amendment.
There are no hands raised for this item.
It's been moved by Gonzalez and seconded by Member Wright. Roll call vote, please. Oh, go ahead, Member Bowders.
Just briefly, I'll be opposing the motion for the same reasons I did when we discussed changing the name. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, roll call vote, please.
One last thing.
So go ahead.
CAC also passed the support staff recommendation with one abstention, all others yes.
Member Patino, go ahead. You're recognized.
No, I just wanted to make sure I got kicked out. I wanted to make sure that I was back in as a panelist. That was it.
You are, thank you. Okay, roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Albany,
Aye.
Berkeley, Dublin, Emeryville, Fremont,
Yes.
Hayward,
Yes.
Livermore,
Yes.
Newark,
Yes.
Oakland, Piedmont,
Aye.
San Leandro,
Aye.
Stockton, Tracy,
Yes.
Union City.
Yes.
Thank you. Pleasanton,
Aye.
Alameda County.
Aye, thank you.
Measures approved.
We'll now move on to item number 14, legislative update. This is, yes.
Since we're now going to have a new name, I assume we're going to be saying formally East Bay Community Energy for a couple of years in all our information written, so, as transitions usually do.
Yes, I mean, we're going to be trying to move quickly, but yes, it's not going to disappear one day to the next.
Okay, thank you.
Thank. Won't go there. Okay, so let's move on to item number 14, legislative update. This is an informational item.
All right. Thank you for having me. I'm Alec Ward, Principal Legislative Manager at EBCE.
I lead our state legislative work and our federal policy work as well. So I'm going to give a quick update on this very active legislative year we had, focusing primarily on the bills that we took positions on earlier this year. So you can jump to the next slide. So you can see the timeline here for the legislative year. This essentially looks relatively the same every year, slight differences in dates. But we have bill introductions in January, and then it goes all the way until final voting days, which this year was September 14th. And then very timely update now, the governor had until last Friday to sign or veto any bills. He was given over 1,000 this year to sign, which is a massive amount. He signed 85% of them, so that led to a 15% veto. That's usually a regular amount. The biggest reasons for veto this year were given tight budget environment and also duplicative or unnecessary rulings. So overall, very, very busy year. At the beginning, we had a historic number of bills introduced, almost 2,000. And then we had a lot of different factors going on as well this year. We had the budget deficit that I mentioned, but we were still able to protect a lot of the energy funding this year. So that was a considered win. We held back some attacks on CCAs, and we also even managed a few wins, like with interconnection, which I'll talk about in a couple slides. So actually, let's just jump right into the bills. Next slide. So the first couple will be the ones that we have positions on. I came in front of this board earlier this year, recommended 8 positions, which we agreed to. And I will start with AB 1373. That was by far the biggest, most hard-fought issue we had this year. We started as oppose unless amend, and then we actually moved to neutral after long negotiations with the governor's office. So this is AB 1373, Garcia. We ended up neutral, and then this bill was signed into law quite recently. So fortunately, this bill was not crammed through the budget process in its original form as the governor put into his budget. It was, again, a long effort. We negotiated heavily with the PUC and the governor's office. Where we landed is a 3-part bill, essentially. The first part is it creates a new central procurement entity. So that means the Department of Water Resources now is able to procure an array of renewable resources, new renewable energies with at least a 5-year lead time, so longer lead time resources. The PUC Public Utilities Commission now has authority to look at what load serving entities like EBC, what we're procuring, and then they could potentially order DWR, Department of Water Resources, to go buy what they think is lacking in this new CPE, the Central Procurement Entity. You'll hear me use that term a lot. So we're going to watch implementation of this very closely. We're concerned because the CCAs that you've seen, we're doing a great job procuring right now. And we don't want to lead to the situation where we're seeing market distortions or the state coming in and bidding for items that we're already going for, which would then raise the prices. So there's a big affordability concern here. The second part of this bill would be create a new capacity payment for load serving entities if they miss their resource adequacy standards. So we've voiced concerns on this item as well. The market is extremely tight right now. As you've heard, load serving entities like ourselves are doing the best they can to procure these tight resources, but extra penalties like capacity payment can lead to just customer rates going up. So this is another thing we're going to watch closely during implementation. And then third, it increases the Public Utilities Commission's oversight into what technologies, what renewable energies we're procuring, CCAs, what CCAs are procuring. This is through the Integrated Resource Planning process, the IRP. This has been an issue area, kind of amorphous regulatory territory and standards over the past couple of years. So this just clarifies that the PUC now has more rights in that space over CCAs. So yeah, this will be a bill that the implementation is going to be key. So we'll keep you all updated on that. Next bill here, we're doing this by issue area. We have energization as the next 4 bills. I'll start off with just a reminder. This was a big issue for us this year. It was it really was the year of reckoning where we asked many of our communities, thank you to many of you that participate in this as well, as what issues are you seeing? And we heard that from housing to community services to building decarb to EVs, so much is currently being held up for a number of reasons, including utilities, namely for us, PG&E holding up the final interconnection of these projects. So this became a big effort for us this year to make this a very known issue and to act on it. So we had 2 successes here right up top. AB 50 by Wood. We supported this bill. It was signed. This would require the PUC to create a shot clock on interconnection. shot clock meaning a maximum amount of time they have until they interconnect these projects, and that's for new and upgraded load. And then there's also more reporting now and more transparency around these processes. This should include greater outreach and stakeholder engagement with local governments. Also, SB 410, Becker, this was a bill that we supported and it was signed as well. This requires the PUC similarly to create shot clocks for new and upgraded load. Consider any actions that the IOUs can take to correct misses and also more increased reporting. This also has an element of expediting funding to IOUs so they can adequately staff this issue. Two bills in the space that didn't make it through this year, AB 643, Berman, we supported. This got moved to a two-year bill, meaning it wasn't passed this year, so it'll be potentially around next year. This would require the PUC to create a similar shot clock and transparency and reporting all around DERs, distributed energy resources, namely residential solar and storage. And then SB 83 Wiener, we supported this bill. It's also a two-year. This would, again, create a similar shot clock, but for new development, and also issue penalties and more reporting for missed deadlines. So we can jump to the next slide. So now we're on to Brown Act bills. If you remember, there were 9 of them this year. It was a bit overwhelming, but it was an underwhelming result at the end of the year. We had AB 557 passed. This was HART. We supported this bill. It was signed. It would permit EDC and local agencies like us to indefinitely continue teleconferencing flexibilities, but only in the case of a state of emergency. So right now, that wouldn't add any sort of flexibility, only when the governor declares. This bill was broader. It was amended a bit tighter. And then there were a couple other ones. I'll actually mention a few slides from now that would have been more helpful as well, but they did not pass this year. So I think this is an issue area that we'll see hopefully a more thoughtful and collaborative process around next year. EVs, we have SB 529 Gonzalez. We supported this bill. It's a 2-year bill. It would require the CEC to create this new grant program for EV sharing at multifamily low-income housing properties. So hopefully we'll see this again next year. Building decarb, we had SB 527 MIN. We supported it. It's a 2-year bill. Established the neighborhood zonal decarb program. It's a pilot program to permit gas corporations to cease service to a neighborhood if the PUC decides that it's better suited for electrification. All right, last slide here. So these are watch bills. We didn't take positions, but they're still very notable and relevant to our business. SB 149 Caballero. This was a signed bill. This is the only one of the ones I'll be talking about on this that was passed and signed this year. So this would streamline the preparation of CEQA and also expedite CEQA cases. This is CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act. So that's largely planning and review of, it was a very broad spectrum of projects, renewable energy projects. I think the biggest impact here will be transmission. So that is something we kept an eye on. With the climate bond, this is going to be something that'll be negotiated potentially this fall, early next year, something that could be exciting. These 2 bills are each proposing $2 billion for a clean energy bond. Likely, one of them will pass. They'll be consolidated, not both. They wouldn't be additive. But the pots are relatively similar, that they would fund transmission and distribution, EV charging, and also federal matching of like IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and IIJ infrastructure bill, matching that at the state level. And then also long duration storage in the second bill. So this will be a space that we're keeping an eye on. Regionalization, AB 538 Holden. This is also a 2-year bill. This would authorize the formation of a Western Transmission or organization, or an RTO. As predicted, as we predicted earlier this year, this was turned into a 2-year bill. It might resurface next year. EVs, we have SB 233, Senator Skinner. This is a 2-year bill. This went through a couple different iterations and ended up in Inform. It would be convening a working group to examine the opportunities and challenges of bidirectional capabilities for EV chargers. And also it would be that CARB can require all new vehicles to be bidirectional. So this is a 2-year bill now. And then the other Brown Act bill that we're watching closely, SB 537 Becker. This is a 2-year bill, and it would permit local agencies like EDC to continue those teleconferencing flexibilities even outside of a state of emergency, only if the member was located 40 miles away from where the meeting was occurring. So this could be helpful for our further away, new territories that are joining. All right, I think that concludes this presentation, so I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Alec, for the presentation. Do we have any questions or comments? Any member participating remotely?
Yes,
Go right ahead, Member Cox.
thank you very much. I appreciate the report and all the details, listing out what's happening legislative updates. One of the things that I would like to find out is how we are, as an organization, going to apply the Levine Act that was passed back this past January, and providing the transparency on all the different contracts that we have approved, and would like to see if there's an update on that part as an organization to be able to comply with that.
And do you have a bill number on that? I'm afraid off the top of my head, I don't have an update, but it's something.
I will have to give you the bill number for that, but it's any contract that may be voted on by a governing body, anything over $250, that we would have to have that disclosed and reported as an organization. If I can find the bill number, give me, you can go in and ask whatever questions, anything else. I have to find the bill number. If
SB 1439, is that correct?
Okay, I think Director Bowders has a comment to make on this item.
Yeah, just, thank you, Madam Chair. It is from last year, right? Yeah, so this is the Glazer bill that you're referring to, Director Cox?
correct.
Yeah, so this is the bill, so I join her in her request. The bill amended the Levine Act, and it requires that any board or member of a board that votes on a contract and cannot vote on a contract if they've received a contribution to a campaign in the amount of $250 or greater in the last 12 months. And if they have, they are not permitted to vote on a contract where the contracting party or company is in front of the board for the following 12 months. So it would be, I would agree, we should get guidance from legal counsel on this. This was it became effective this year in July or June, I forget which month, but FPPC adopted its rules, and it essentially, if we were to vote on company X getting a procurement contract or whatever, and that company or a member of its board made a contribution of $250 or more in the past year to a member of this board, the vote is actually nullified if that member does not recuse and they participate in it. So it has significant consequences for us, and I do agree with her, and I would just suggest that we get legal guidance on that.
Thank you, Director Wright.
Yeah, it's also 1-year retroactive, so if you accept a campaign donation, you can't accept anything for the following year. If we accepted anything from January 1st, 2023 forward, that person's vote becomes null and void.
Okay,
So
so
it can change the result of a vote.
I'm going to ask.
And if I could add one other thing, is that based on other legal and other government entities, they even identify in the agenda which items are contracts that would need to have that Levine Act disclosure. And so it kind of takes even more detail that it's apparent not only for us voting on it, but also for the public to know which ones would be applicable in those scenarios. So there's a lot of things that wrap itself around besides the reporting, the compliance, but also the visibility of even how we even do our board meeting agendas.
And there is a cure provision in it where you can give the money back.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask our council if this can come back to us as a future discussion, just to inform all of the directors of the policies around this.
Sure, I'd be happy to provide a summary. Just to be clear, each individual board member is going to be responsible for monitoring your own campaign contributions. So what we can do is provide information about who is bringing the contract forward and who the parties are. But ultimately, the onus of all of these conflict of interest laws falls on each and every individual board member. So I just wanted to clarify that I can't,
Correct.
not having access to your campaign information, I would not be able to answer individual questions. You are expected to monitor this yourself. Thank you.
Correct. We just want to make sure we're clear on the provisions. Director Roche.
Yeah, just really quick. I mean, this is speculative, so I will appreciate your input when you get it back. But my understanding, there's been some sort of legal analysis of that, and that there is a question of it can
Actually, you know what? I think I'm
Should
going
I
to
not
chime
do
in.
that?
We're actually getting into a discussion.
You know,
and we
it's fine actually,
shouldn't.
because I'm speculating anyway.
Is that okay? I think we're kind of going in a different direction. So not about this item, because it's not specifically on the agenda. We're starting to get into a discussion. So if there are any questions specific to the legislative update, Director Bowders.
I just want to give a comment on the last Brown Act bill you had there. It was a watch, so I'm not concerned about that we've taken action. It's a 2-year bill, it said, but it had the 40-mile, if you live more than 40 miles away, you could participate remotely, but if you lived within 40 miles, you had to be in person. Something that gets overlooked is people without a car who rely on active transportation. I have found that this has been a burden for people like me because essentially if the meeting is 35 miles away, you're asking me to bike for 2.5 hours to the meeting. So I just would ask that if we are going to engage that or talk to the sponsor, if that bill goes forward, that there needs to be a reasonable time requirement alternative to the mile requirement.
Great point. Thank you.
Director Kell.
Thank you. I just, the interconnection bills, those could, assuming they're implemented well, those are big deals. I mean, Nick, would you agree that these bills are a big deal as a whole? The interconnection bills, if they actually work as intended?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why we've been working on them so diligently, because they do have the ability to have quite a consequence. I think this is going to be, we're at the beginning of this effort to get interconnection. And when we're talking about interconnection, we're not just talking about the connecting of solar or wind, but really we're talking about housing projects, hospitals, et cetera.
Right, yeah, I see there 2 of them are 2-year bills, which didn't make it out of the first house. Is that because they were told, oh, we got these other 2 bills, let's just take your time, or did they actually have opposition?
They have opposition.
The other 2 bills. So we have some.
So there's quite strong opposition from the investor-owned utilities to put any sort of requirements or penalties around connection of load.
But didn't they oppose the first 2 bills that did pass as well?
Yes.
So we have some opportunity to pass these second 2 bills next year. And
yeah.
Okay.
So we'll
They
continue
ended
to
up
work on them.
supporting 410 after long negotiations due to that balancing account that got worked in there. But it was,
Understood.
so these bills were changed over time. We used to really, they used to be stronger. They had accountability measures that were largely taken out. So there's certainly more progress to be made and work to be done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on this? This is an informational item. Seeing none, we'll open up public comment. Do we have any members of the public that would like to make a comment on this item? This is still item number 14, legislative update.
There are no hands raised for public comment.
Okay, Alec, I really like the presentation. The format was extremely easy to follow and comprehensive. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to item number 15. This is an action item. This is the SunZia project agreement. And if you give me a second, who is kicking off this presentation? Sorry. Okay, Jim, welcome.
Hello, everybody. Sorry again about being virtual, but good evening, everybody, members of the board, Chair Marquez. It's nice to see you all in there. So we're talking about renewable energy tonight. This is good stuff. And so we're bringing a project to the board, and we're asking the board to authorize the chief executive officer to execute an agreement for a SunZia wind project, which is a New Mexico wind project. It's 150 megawatts of a larger project, 3,515 megawatts total, provide renewable energy to EPC customers, energy hedge and resource adequacy as well. The project is directly interconnected into California, even though it's in New Mexico, but it's energy that will flow directly into the state and be used for California residents and EPC customers. So the action is to ask the board to authorize the execution of the agreement, but then we're also going to spend some time talking about what the project came from, which is our 2023 long-term request for offer, RFO for short. Let's go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so in general, we'll talk about the RFO and a little bit of the stuff that we're seeing. We'll discuss some of our evaluation criteria, and then just kind of some snapshot pictures of what's actually happening in the RFO progress-wise. Next slide. There we go. A lot of information here. So this is, again, the board materials available. I'm going to touch on some of the points here. But basically, this is kind of a large-scale picture of what we're trying to do with the RFO, with the 2023 renewable energy RFO. So again, the goal is, new renewable energy projects, renewable energy for our customers, for our new customers, providing reliability to the state through our regulatory requirements. The midterm and the near-term reliability requires new steel in the ground to keep the light bulbs on for customers and people in the state. And then to meet the many compliance obligations that we have, both under RPS and the other different rules that we need to operate under as a load serving entity in the state. But again, the biggest one is renewable energy, PCC1 RECs delivered into the state of California. We set pretty broad parameters and scope for the projects that we would evaluate as part of it. Always eyes are as close to home as possible. Projects that are in service territory that our customers can see is always a priority. But the characteristics that we're looking for the projects consist of those within California, but also within the West wide, as long as the energy was deliverable into the CAISO, like the project we're discussing tonight. We look for projects that can come online anywhere as early as 2024, all the way through 2030. And this aligns with some of the reliability requirements that we have from the CPUC. And then technology-wise, I mean, again, pretty broad: renewables, wind, solar, geothermal. We also had some carve-outs for clean energy, emission-free energy from large hydro. And then in addition to the generation, we're always looking at storage projects as well that both give reliability and resource adequacy, but also allow us to accurately hedge our energy cost in the actual CAISO market. So again, broad swath to try to get as many different projects we can evaluate. And as always, prioritize and move forward those projects that are close to home, that are in territory, but also look at those that have potential risk and evaluate those intelligently alongside everything else's. And then, of course, the big one is economics. And we use a metric, which I'll discuss, to kind of compare the projects across each other through the project economics. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is kind of just a general breakdown of the different products that we were asking the bidders to submit as part of the RFO. The term here is as available RPS product, but really what it is a renewable generating facility. So solar panels in the ground, wind turbines in the sky, all those things that produce generation as the turbines turn and as the sun comes out. So that's product one. And then in addition to those standalone generation assets, we also evaluate those that had storage paired with them. And so again, the ability to move daytime solar energy into the higher demand and higher energy price time during the peak time. And then product three is a firm and shape product that's also renewable. And so this would be where we secure megawatt hours from a renewable source, but they fit into specific hours during the daytime. And then lastly, as I mentioned, just standalone batteries or standalone different energy storage types. It doesn't have to be only batteries, but anything and that includes kind of a menu of different durations, including those over the more typical 4-hour durations were also evaluated. Next slide, please. Just some general stats. Again, a lot of interest in this RFO. We started in March of 23 is when we submitted, and we really moved pretty quickly to evaluate a large amount of projects. 72 unique different project sites, and each of those with either one or more than one project variation, and that could be changes in delivery term or nameplate or many other ways that we evaluate the project. So 195 different variations compared to a similar amount of variations, but from less sites in the 2022 RFO, which was the one we did the year prior. Again, the projects we saw mainly in California, but also projects across the West, including into the Northwest, Wyoming, and Idaho. But again, the majority of projects that we saw were those in state in California. Asterisk here on the bottom, 6 projects were in EBC territory, and they were heavily evaluated as, I mean, just plainly speaking, is there's economic challenges in developing projects here in the territory. And even if the economics weren't aligned with other projects within the RFO, we evaluated those pretty extensively. And one we chased as far as we could, and we weren't able to get across the finish line on it. But that was an in-territory project that ended up having some challenges with the land use. But all of the projects, even if they weren't aligned directly from a economic standpoint, those in territory were heavily evaluated, and one of them was chased pretty far. Next slide, please. So what do we look at? We evaluated 3 kind of main criteria: the counterparty execution, their ability to build a project, the economics of the certain project's value compared to other projects using the same tools, and then development status. You know, how far along is the project? When's the COD? How many of the many boxes that you need to check have they checked to actually have something that's generated and that's reached commercial operation? Each of those 3 kind of primary categories have many different sub areas, and we rate those, and we weight them under different kind of rules, and then we get this gigantic list of 195 different rows in the spreadsheet. And then we look at those and try to make some decisions on diversity, on portfolio fit, and kind of keeping strong economics for the benefit of our customers as well to keep our rates. We use a concept called net present value that we use to compare the project's value on a per megawatt basis from project to project. That's kind of based on a forward forecast of the energy market. And so you picture a contract with a 10 or 15-year term. We're looking at what the value of that produced energy is going to be in 2030, 2040, and making estimates of what the value that project is going to bring to East Bay customers. Now, those are forecasts, they're guesses, but it is a means for us to compare the projects to each other. Last year, we used 3 of these forward curves, and this year we've doubled that to 6. And so we have kind of what we consider a pretty diverse view of different forecasts for the forward market. You know, heavy electric vehicle adoption, retirements of Diablo Canyon, and different kind of views of the energy market. And that lets us get a nice range of possibilities for the projects. But the main tool that we use this for is to be able to compare the projects to each other. And so a high NPV, a positive NPV, is a favorable project for us, and a deeply negative NPV is unfavorable for East Bay customers. Next slide, please. So what's happening new this year that wasn't the case in 20 or 22? You know, 2021 and 22 were hard years for the supply chain with COVID and the pandemic. We saw project delays across the board. We saw some changes at the governmental level for how panels are brought into the state for the better, and that put some impact on getting panels there. We saw the increase of material costs. We've seen the increase in capital costs, and we've seen generally more demand for projects. And so what this basically has led to is, you know, pretty high prices relative to the projects that we evaluated 2 years ago, to the tune of 30 to 40%. And so PPAs that we were looking at 2-3 years ago are the ones that we're seeing now are significantly higher in price than to be expected with the challenges in the marketplace. Next slide, please. So back to the headline here. So we're talking specifically about one project that came through from the 2023 long-term resource request for offer. And this is our New Mexico wind project, which I'll now spend a good amount of the time talking about. And so it's a large project. It's 3,515 megawatts in New Mexico, again, directly connected into California. Electrons flow from the wind turbines into the state of California, California customers directly. We're asking the board to grant the CEO the right to execute this agreement. So it's for 150 megawatts of that total, with an expected online date in September of 26. This project is being developed by Pattern Energy, which I'll discuss on the next slide. At the same time, you know, after the RFO evaluation, the economics on the project are very favorable. It's not easy to get wind, and especially a large scale project like this, which fits our portfolio very nicely. As I discussed at the CAC, the energy shape is almost an inverse to solar. And so it fits really well with the existing solar in our portfolio. And it's a nice project that evaluated really well for us. With that said, and this is just kind of an add-on, but EBC is also considering taking additional megawatts in addition to the 150. And if we do, it would be brought to the board, but we're under consideration for increasing our offtake from this project if obviously we're approved here tonight. Next slide, please.
Yeah, I think we need to advance the slide.
So Pattern Energy, just some of the details here. Again, these are more specifics to the project, which I talked on the last one. I'm just highlighting here that there's a requirement for prevailing wage in the agreement, and that as available, labor union work on the project. The contracting entity is SunZia Wind Power Company, and that's, again, the project company, but the main developer is Pattern Energy. Next slide, please. So Pattern Energy, for one, we know them. We have a New Mexico wind asset with them currently that's online, that's operating the Tecolote Wind Project that is providing renewable energy to our customers currently. They're the largest privately owned developer, and they operate wind and solar, and they're kind of concentrated in the Northeast. Sorry, the Southwest. 30 renewable energy projects and 6 gigawatts of total generation in the US, Canada, and Japan. And again, just a really good, strong track record with California utilities, with CCAs, including EBC, as you can see by the list here. You know, it's really important to us with these projects, as we've come to you before, that we can rely on our partners to get the project built, to get a project of this scale built, where many California entities can receive generation from, and it's a good fit for us as far as a developer and buyer relationship. Next slide, please. So I'm going to pause there for a second. So just to kind of remind everyone what we're talking about here. So we initiated our 2023 RFO in March, and from that we had very, very robust offering of projects come in. Again, a lot of them to evaluate, and we measured using the quantitative and qualitative tools that we had and that we use across the projects. And the SunZia project scored very highly as far as the economics and the other ones. And again, it's not in territory, but that is always our consideration. But it's a good project and a good fit for us as an organization. So we're asking the board to, again, authorize the CEO to execute the agreement for the project. From there, the next steps is to kind of lock down the last couple of terms and to execute. And then, again, work with the project to reach commercial operation in September. And then, because these projects all are attached to our regulatory filings and our IRP cycle, to then include that, if executed, inside our portfolio moving forward. Okay, next slide. Just to remind everyone of what our current portfolio is, that's what this last slide is. You know, we see Altamont there on the top, our in-service territory project. From Altamont down to Daggett South are all of our online projects. That's the top 6. They're all generating, whether they're standalone storage or wind or solar. And then the bottom, I'm guessing that is 7, are in development, including COLA, which is our storage project in Alameda or San Joaquin County currently. That's 125 megawatts. Yeah, I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. We have a question from Member Gonzalez.
There's, what is that, 150 megawatts out of 3,000. Where do we sit in the sequence? Because I know we've had certain disputes before where, you know, we thought we were buying X% of a project, and someone else thought that we were maybe the flea on the tail of the dog. That's a characterization, I understand that, but I'd like to just understand, again, you know me, risk. Like, is this real resource adequacy, or is this marginal resource adequacy?
I can answer that, Nick, or Howard.
Yeah,
wants to take
Jim,
it.
why don't you start and I have a comment.
Okay, I mean, I guess the only thing is that I'd like to think that there's lessons learned from the experience we've had with the other projects, and we're very cognizant of that with this project, and are putting tools in the agreement to ensure that our offtake is going to be there, whether the project's fully downsized at all. And again, I think the awareness is the important step. That I can't make guarantees on this, but we're putting the tools we need to in the agreement to enforce our ability to have our offtake reach COD on it, and it's with the counterparty that we have a relationship with and a trust with to build it for as far as that goes. As far as the resource adequacy, it's incremental, and so it's new capacity into the state of California, and it is full normal box check resource adequacy.
I think the second question, my only other question, deals with, it's really a governance question. On this board, will this contract, the actual contract, come back to us for approval? Does it depend on the size of the contract, et cetera?
So the contract will not come back for approval. The approval is given in the form of a delegation to negotiate and execute. The fully executed contract is held by the authority and is available for review.
Member Roche?
Yes. All of those projects on that chart are PCC1.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from Board of Directors? Member Cox?
Thank you. I appreciate the report and update on this pending wind project. I had a question, and it may go to our legal, and that is that they talk about that this contract could split into two separate agreements, and wanted to kind of understand how is that going to work to protect our interest? And is there some triggers that what if one part of the contract has most of our work in and the other one's smaller, and that may not meet our needs? So just wanted to get some legal weigh in on this, please.
I think it's a reference to Jim mentioned that there may be a discussion to increase the volumes. So this is 150 megawatts. Okay, something else.
I think this is in reference to the resolution that it may be assigned to two agreements. Is that the question specifically? So because of the
and
size
it's also
of this
in your
particular facility,
the staff report on the second page.
Hold on, Member Cox. I think he's trying to respond.
due to the size of this particular project, which is quite large, the developer is considering a sale process, which is pretty common for renewable projects in general, but certainly for something of this size, they may sell half of the project to a different owner and retain half of the project for operations. And in that instance, they would split the project. You know, there may be a north-south division as an example. And as a result of that, our contract actually gets split into two. I think we actually have an interest in allowing that because that would allow for some diversification among such a large project and as opposed to some concentration risk of some portion that may actually have slightly different wind profile. So that's what that is in reference to. And I think that would be a pretty clean split and the contract would simply be replicated. You would just have certain output from this portion, certain output from another portion. That is contingent on a sale and that's not definitive, but there are some parameters in there that would allow for that.
And is there like a set priority that we'd be giving more of a priority to supply the power to us versus some of the other arrangements that may occur as a possibility of splitting into those separate agreements?
I think in this case, we're talking about one very large, massive wind project. And
Okay.
so the desire to split that is because they're doing a different financing structure on one significant portion of it. And so the performance obligations and the treatment to us in terms of how much renewables we get, I would say is relatively immaterial. It's really the intent of the financing and ownership structure.
Okay. Okay, thank you for explaining that. I appreciate that. The other question I had was related to some of the challenges in the supply and demand. Is there anything that we should be aware of any additional risk at this time, since that was noted in the report as well?
I don't think there's any specific known incremental risks. I mean, I think if the last couple of years have taught us anything, though, that expect the unexpected.
But there was an ongoing supply chain disruption and delays that are challenges in the market, and just wanted to kind of understand how does that impact us with the wind project? A little bit more detail there.
Yeah, I don't again, there is no specific delay or issue that this project is per se facing. So we're not aware of a specific wind turbine supply agreement that Pattern has entered into that is facing tariff circumvention issues, which we have solar projects that have faced modules that are actually taken at the port and are put aside as trade issues are being worked out. So we're not aware at this time of any of those issues. And that was sort of my reference that the last few years, though, have taught us that there are unforeseen things that occur that create global supply chain. And, I think if anything, all the more reason why it's important to work with experienced developers who have a good track record. They are more likely to have multiple suppliers that they work with. You're more likely to have equipment that they've already purchased and they hold in a warehouse, as opposed to smaller developers that may not have that wherewithal or are going to be more at risk of facing a disruption that puts the project at existential risk.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Cox. I have a follow-up question. Jim, in your presentation, you mentioned that there was applicants from within California, but it was just cost prohibited. Can you elaborate on that? I think you mentioned some issues with securing land entitlements and just the viability, getting the project up and running.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I would just say that's for projects in territory. We do see robust and economically viable projects in the state, but those that were in territory, either of the 6 we saw, most of them, the economics wasn't going to do well for our customers from just a pure cost standpoint. And then the project that we did evaluate, there was a conflict on the use of land there, and they decided to go and move forward with another offtake or continue to negotiate with someone that wasn't us. Our hands were tied at that point. We couldn't negotiate further, but we did begin the negotiation process on the project. It's just we couldn't move forward with it, and I think we're all disappointed about that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions from Board of Directors? Okay.
Can I just add one
Yes.
thing is on the tails of that comment, I just want to make sure it's noted that this is the first of multiple approvals that we'll bring forward to the board for various long-term PPAs. So there will be other in-state projects that we'll bring forth as well. This just happens to be the first one that we've kind of prepared and ready to seek approval.
Okay, follow-up question, Director Gonzalez.
You're asking for permission to enter PPAs, so the board is not actually reviewing PPAs.
This is seeking approval to enter into negotiate and enter a PPA for this particular project. And what I was noting is in the future, we intend to bring forward other approvals for other PPA projects.
Understood, but we are not either here or in the future has contemplated approving a PPA, the language, the economics, the risk thereof.
Correct.
Director Kell?
Thank you. Thank you to the staff and everybody for doing this. Each contract we have is a lot of intensive work. I know there were, how many solicitations were there that came back? Yeah.
Jim can probably identify this more, but in slide 5, there were 72 unique project sites and about 195 project variations. So quite a number.
And are we only selecting one of all of those? Or that's just what's?
No, yeah, that was my comment is this is one out of a number of projects from this solicitation that we will bring forward. This is just the first one.
Okay,
that's
happy
furthest
to,
along.
I'm happy to make a motion to approve the item.
Hold on, let me make sure there's no public comment. Is there any public comment on this item? Item number 15, the Senzia project agreement. No public comments?
I'll second it.
There are no public comments at this time.
Okay, I believe the action item has been moved by Director Calvin, seconded by Bowders. Is that correct? Okay, roll call vote, please. It
To
was,
repeat.
oh, sorry, I apologize. I'm rushing through this. There's comments from our CAC.
Yes, just want to highlight that there was discussion ensued about the need and desire to fund local projects. One thing I'll take a point of privilege, I did highlight the concern that I had about the evaluation rubric with Jim about the 3 areas of counterparty execution, offer competitiveness, and project development status. But more discussion that happened there is about the organizational values of East Bay Community Energy. And what are those values really, the types of jobs we're creating, local or away, making sure there's letters of support for these projects, environmental justice concerns that were raised as well. Again, creating those local jobs, is it in and out of state? A lot of preference is local job creation, local community support. And what does that metric really do? How do they really evaluate it? Talked a lot about the cost standpoint, not the value. We can always look at the lowest cost, but what value are we bringing to our community? I mean, we might be shifting to AVA Community Energy, but we're still a community-driven energy organization. So ultimately, at the end of the day, I think Jim showed a letter of support that I think the developer worked on for about 18 months. And he provided that letter of support that really helped us feel comfortable with supporting the project. Ultimately, there was 5 that say yes and 4 that abstained. So we carried forward with approving and supporting the project, excuse me.
Thank you for that comprehensive review on this item. So that does raise a good point. In terms of bringing the future PPAs to us, when are we going to get a chance to look at, as was mentioned, the value in terms of bringing projects within our territory?
I mean, so we do a full full analysis. That analysis is confidential, so we do convene a ad hoc committee of the board to walk through the actual net present value and analyses that we go through. I think when we think about local projects, I just want to be very, and Jim, correct me, of those local, how many were generation? 1, right? Or 2?
Yeah, I can't speak to that. I'm not sure. 1 for sure, but I don't know if there's more.
So just a couple of things. One, we're talking about local projects. I believe only 1, and it may be 2, but I believe only 1 was a generation project. There were some local storage projects that were not particular. They were very much out of the market from a cost perspective. And when we think about generation, solar projects, wind projects, we have very limited land space for large solar. And as a when we did pursue a limited contract with a project in unincorporated Livermore, there was very significant pushback. I believe the Alameda County Board of Supervisors has implemented an effective moratorium on large-scale solar development while they develop a broad-based land use plan. So from what we understand, there are no large-scale solar projects being developed in Alameda County at this time that are not. So there's only a few that are available. And then wind projects, there are very specific limits from a land use perspective on how much new wind can be developed in the Altamont. So the project that was offered to us, we were very keen on it, but because of some of the land ownership issues, effectively who owned the land that the project was going to be sited on, resulted in that entity having an effective right of first refusal on the project. So that project went to them. There are some further out there wind projects in the Altamont that we're having very active dialogue. I believe we have a right of first refusal on at least one of them, but it's facing significant avian issues and grid connection issues. And so when we sort of look at the landscape for larger like meaningful volumes of things that are not on rooftops, it's very limited. That's why when we think about local generation projects, we have focused very much on putting things on rooftops. That's why we have our critical municipal facility program. We do have, and I'm not sure when we're going to bring it forward, Howard, the community solar PPAs, DAC GT.
I think it's over the next couple of months.
So in the
We're
next couple of months, we
closing
will
process.
have, I believe it's 3 separate large-scale rooftop solar PPAs that we're going to be bringing forward to the board. These are projects that are going to be located in service area. So all that is to say, we have local projects. It's just that we don't tend to see a lot of stuff in our service area show up in these RFOs because these are very large projects. Now, perhaps that changes as we move beyond the city of Tracy into San Joaquin, where there are bigger pieces of land to develop projects.
So I'll just ask a quick follow-up question. What's the size and acreage that we would need for large solar? Can you give me an idea? How do we quantify that?
A large scale, so typically I believe 1 megawatt of solar is roughly 7 to 10 acres.
Okay.
So a large project, let's say 50 megawatts. So, 350 to 500 acres is and a 50 megawatt solar project is a small solar project. So hundreds of acres, potentially thousands of acres of land are required for large-scale solar development.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And I will go ahead and ask for the roll call vote unless there's any additional questions or comments. See none. And the motion was made by Kalb, seconded by Bowders.
Thank you. Albany,
Aye.
Berkeley, Dublin, Emeryville, Fremont,
Yes.
Hayward,
Yes.
Livermore, Newark,
Yes.
Oakland, Piedmont,
Aye.
San Leandro,
Aye.
Stockton, Tracy,
Yes.
Union City,
Yes.
Pleasanton,
Yes.
Alameda County.
Aye, thank
Motion
you.
affirmed.
Thank you so much. We're now going to move on to item number 16, board member and staff announcements, including requests to place items on future board agendas. Do we have any staff announcements? Director Wright, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. In Stockton and actually in a lot of Central Valley cities, we're dealing now with issues of increasing numbers of warehouses. And one of the, in fact, we just had a Walmart fulfillment center approved that's going to be the size basically of 3 Amazon warehouses. And they were only able to be approved after coming to an agreement with the Attorney General on some of the mitigations required for a project that large. I've been in conversations with our local Sierra Club in San Joaquin County, and one of their asks is asking these, not just Walmart, but the others that have much warehouse space in Stockton to consider rooftop solar as a not only a mitigation, but a potential resource for the communities. And I think there might be a synergy here. So I'm just asking that we keep this, our antenna up on this, and if asked to participate in any conversations on this, I would hope that we could send staff to communicate regarding this as we go through this negotiation process with the Attorney General. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members that would like to place an item on a future agenda?
Yes,
Go ahead, Member Cox.
the one we talked about earlier, the Levine Act, to make sure that's put
Yes, I
on the.
think that's been noted. We'll get a briefing on the Levine Act. And then also, I just wanted to ask with regard to the metrics to the local development business plan, would that item come back to the full board or the executive board?
I believe we would present the full findings to the full board, but we could present on an interim basis, what those metrics are. We're not setting new metrics. These are metrics that were set forth in the plan. Many of you probably, I don't know if anyone here was actually on the board at the time. I think maybe Lisa, you were, or as an alternate. So certainly, why don't I ask my team to come forward at an executive committee meeting to start to present on the metrics that were included and kind of what the scope of the review is going to be.
Okay, thank you. Member Roche.
I just want to make sure we noted that we're going to look at like a preliminary acceleration of project of procurement.
Procurement, yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think that's going to be tied in with our budget process, but also in the beginning of the year. Is there anyone else? Go ahead.
There are 4 items from the CAC on the $14.75 million from the budget meeting that was supposed to return before the end of the year to make a decision on the use of that grant or the gift. I think there's similar funds on this year's budget also decide the desired use. So understanding how that money is going to be applied, that was at 14.75 and additional monies. Figure out how that's going to be contributed to the community. There was an update from a request also for an update on bringing that cost center in-house. It was brought up in the status of that item, and also intentions with the acquired property in Oakland. What's the intent of that property? Would it go to the market, or could it be maybe a resilient hub or some other use like apprenticeship or training? Thank you.
Thank you for re-summarizing those, but I think all of those items have been asked for in the past. So I think we're working with staff to track when's the best time to bring those items back, but thank you for the reminder. We're now going to move to closed session. I am going to ask if there's any public comment on closed session. This is public employee performance evaluation pursuant to Government Code Section 54957 with regard to Chief Executive Officer. Do we have any public comments with respect to closed session?
There are no hands raised at this time.
Okay, we're going to keep it brief, I promise, but we're going to adjourn to closed session. So our members participating remotely, they have to log off and log into a different link. Is that correct?
Yes, I just sent the updated link to our remote participants.
And then can I ask council, does everyone have to come back when we do the report out, or can just the chair come back so people can leave after closed session?
Technically, I can do the report out, or anyone can do the report out. If you want to come back, Chair, we can go ahead and handle that. Everyone else can go home from there.
Everyone else can go after closed session.
And for any
but
members of the public waiting, we are not anticipating having anything to report out of closed session.
we have to go to a different room, yes.
How's it going? How are we not freezing during this? It's really hot. I feel the exact opposite.
Do you really? You should eat some cookies.
Absolutely would. Yeah.
It's hot here.
Have you hit up any other CP events?
Not since that one, no.
Nice. How are you?
No. How about you?
No, they're on like international stuff. I don't get tapped for. Jay's always like, you know, if you just join, you can come to Iceland. I'm like, shut up, Jay.
That is quite the carrot there.
And I'm like, whatever, Jay.
I was happy when the first Walmart Fulfillment Center came in, you know. But they just have to stop. I just don't want to turn into San Bernardino.
But it's just something to sort of keep on your head. And if I actually get an opinion about it, I'll send it to you. Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. She was chatting.
Okay, good evening. I'm going to reconvene this meeting and ask our council to speak on item number 18.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have nothing to report out of closed session.
Thank you so much. This meeting is adjourned and our next meeting is in November, not knowing the date, but the third Wednesday. Thank you.